It was a dismal afternoon in Coloma, California, a day that would forever be etched in the annals of gold rush history as one of unspeakable tragedy and bloodshed. The sound of crashing waves against the rocks broke the otherwise uneasy silence that had settled over the small mining settlement like a funeral shroud. The year was 1850, and the California gold rush was in full swing, its promises of wealth and prosperity drawing people from all corners of the globe, from European immigrants fleeing poverty to Chinese laborers seeking opportunity, from American farmers abandoning their plows to Mexican prospectors chasing dreams, to the rugged beauty of the Sierra Nevada foothills, where fortunes could be made overnight or lost just as quickly in the blink of an eye. What happened on this fateful day would shake the foundations of one of California's most prominent families and expose the dark underbelly of the gold rush. Subscribe now so you don't miss a single detail of this shocking true story. Among the hopeful fortune seekers was a man named John Sutter, a prosperous and influential landowner known throughout the region for his welcoming spirit, his grand vision for California's future as a beacon of civilization, and his entrepreneurial dreams that seemed as vast and limitless as the territory itself. However, this particular day would unravel into a tragedy of unimaginable proportions, casting a shadow over his life and legacy that would never fully lift, haunting him until his dying breath. Among all the losses he would suffer in his lifetime, none would cut as deeply as what was about to unfold. The backdrop of the gold rush, where fortunes were made and lives lost at an alarming rate in the pursuit of glittering dreams that often turned to dust, set the stage for a brutal crime that would shock even the hardened miners who had witnessed countless acts of violence. The cold-blooded murder of John Sutter's son, a young man named John Sutter, Jr., who represented both his father's hopes for the future and the promise of a new generation that would build California into something greater than the lawless frontier it had become. The Sutter family was no stranger to hardship and disappointment in this unforgiving land. The gold rush had turned their land, once ripe with agricultural promise and peaceful prosperity, under John Sutter's careful stewardship, into a chaotic battleground of greed, violence, and betrayal that seemed to consume everything in its path like a wildfire. As gold fever gripped the populace with an almost supernatural intensity, transforming ordinary men into desperate criminals, the inherent enmity among men, the suspicion and paranoia that came with striking it rich or losing everything in a single day, laid the foundation for deadly rivalries that could erupt at any moment over the smallest perceived slight or dispute. On a fateful October evening, as the sun began to set behind the towering mountains casting long, ominous shadows across the valley below, John Jr. rode out on horseback to meet a friend, contemplating the thrill of striking it rich and making his own mark on this wild new world that seemed full of infinite possibilities. The young man's naivety was palpable to those who knew him. He underestimated the ruthlessness of the men consumed by their insatiable lust for gold, men who had abandoned their humanity, their morals, and their very souls in pursuit of wealth. When he didn't return by nightfall, when his horse came back without its rider, John Sutter grew frantic, his heart racing with the terrifying specters of danger lurking in the shadows of the sprawling wilderness where law was often decided by the barrel of a gun rather than the words of a judge or the protection of civilized society. Days turned into an agonizing search that seemed to stretch on forever, each hour feeling like an eternity, with search parties combing through dangerous ravines, abandoned mining camps, and treacherous mountain passes. Despite the vast wilderness that could swallow a man whole and never reveal his fate, whispers began to circulate around town of a violent altercation at a nearby mining camp. Rumors carried on hushed voices in dimly lit saloons and around flickering campfires where men spoke in code and watched their backs. Sutter's worst fears were realized when he learned of a brutal confrontation between his son and an unscrupulous gang pursuing quick wealth at any cost, ruthless men who would kill without hesitation, without remorse, if they believed it would lead them to gold or eliminate a rival. Stay with us as we uncover the shocking details of what happened next, and if you haven't already, subscribe now. This story takes a dark turn you won't believe. The sparks that set off this deadly explosion of violence were ignited by accusations of theft and escalating tensions over valuable claims along the American River, where gold had been discovered in quantities that drove men mad with desire. The miners, driven to desperation by dwindling fines and mounting debts that threatened to ruin them, had resorted to merciless tactics, scouring the territory with reckless abandon, deadening their morality and their conscience in the process, becoming more animal than human. John Jr. found himself cornered by three men in a remote canyon far from help, led by a charlatan and criminal named Jack McCauley, a known and feared figure in the mining community who had built his sinister reputation on intimidation, violence, and the bodies of those who had crossed him. The clash between youthful idealism and raw, unchecked greed spiraled out of control rapidly, leading from harsh words to drawn weapons, leading to a confrontation that would seal John Jr.'s fate in the most horrific way imaginable and deprive him of the bright future that should have been his. When the body was finally recovered days later in a shallow, hastily dug grave near the river, partially covered with rocks and branches, it bore the terrible marks of brutality, multiple stab wounds, signs of a struggle, the result of a twisted battle fueled by avarice and the complete absence of human compassion or mercy. The news rattled the entire community to its core, igniting fear among families who now locked their doors at night and outrage among those who still believed in justice and the rule of law in this lawless land. Sutter, devastated beyond words and consumed by a rage at the senseless death of his beloved son that threatened to destroy him from within, sought justice but found himself ensnared in a web of conspiracy and corruption that seemed to have no end, that reached into every corner of the mining community. The local law enforcement, riddled with corrupt miners who had been bought off with gold dust and promises, and those who claimed allegiance to the lawless gold rush lifestyle above all else, including their sworn duties, turned a blind eye to the murder. They were complicit in the cover-up, even as they swore sacred oaths to uphold the law and protect the innocent. The tangled threads of power and influence obscured the truth at every turn, making it almost impossible to bring the killers to justice, as witnesses disappeared or suddenly couldn't remember what they had seen. Fueling the fury among honest miners who still maintained their principles and remembered what it meant to be civilized men, Sutter began a passionate and tireless campaign against the corrupt establishment that had failed his family so completely and betrayed everything decent society stood for. Yet he also learned the bitter lesson that the bonds of greed could eclipse the values of loyalty and honor that once defined frontier communities and held them together. The horrific fate of John Jr. catalyzed a deeper introspection on the devastating effects of the gold rush, a haunting reflection of human behavior when faced by the possibility of riches and the moral compromises people were willing to make, the lines they were willing to cross. In the aftermath of this tragedy, the town was divided along bitter lines that would take years to heal. Some remembered John Jr. for his idealism, his kindness, his promise, and the bright future that had been stolen from him by men motivated nothing but greed. Others saw him as a victim of a larger narrative, a casualty of an emerging world where morality was sacrificed on the altar of fortune and where human life had become cheap, worth less than the gold in the streams. Sutter knew in his heart that without justice, his son's death would continue to echo through the ages, a stark reminder of the perils of ambition gone awry and the human cost of unchecked greed that consumed everything in its path. Thank you for watching this heartbreaking tale from the Gold Rush era. Subscribe now for more powerful stories of tragedy, justice, and the human cost of America's westward expansion. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next video, and we'll see you in the next one.